A very happy Tuesday afternoon to each and every one of you. Thank you for being here today as we are continuing our study through God's Word, as we continue to walk through history, the story of God, and as is revealed to us in the Scriptures. We are continuing to work our way through the book of the Judges. Thank you for being here. Glad that we have all seemingly made it through the snowpocalypse of 2021. It is very nice to be out of my house for the first time in many days, and I'm glad to be able to study together with you all again. Alan String is with me as always. Alan, glad you made it through as well. We were talking beforehand that you were really happy to not lose power. I know that would have caused you guys a lot of issues, but we're very happy that that we didn't get a lot of that here. Although we both, I'm sure, have good friends and people that we love a great deal who were not so fortunate, especially places like Texas and elsewhere. I know they had a really tough time last week. But we're thankful that we've made it through, and we're ready to get back to some semblance of normalcy once again.
I even got to wear some short sleeves today. So
hey, that's right, short sleeves. Hey.
Short sleeves because it's warm.
Yeah.
Also tribute. We're talking about Samson.
Oh
so
man!
flash the guns there.
Got to get the guns out. Well, we can definitely tell you have not been out in the sun very much lately. Hopefully that will be coming up here soon. The sun is shining today. We're very, very thankful for that. God has been very good to us, and we're especially grateful to be able to be in His Word today. Thank you for joining us once again. Let's get into the text, Alan. We are in Judges 15. We have already gone through a couple of chapters of the Samson saga here in the book of the Judges, which really brings the story of the judges themselves to a conclusion once we get past chapter 16 into chapter 17. That may not show exactly a chronological explanation of what was taking place during this time of the time period of the Judges. That might have been sprinkled in there somewhere, not chronological with the way the writing goes, just showing exactly how bad things were and why they got to the level that they were. But here we have the conclusion in 15 to 16 of the story of the judges themselves. And we're seeing Samson, probably one of the most famous of the judges, really showing himself to be a personal representation of Israel at that time. We've talked a lot, Alan, about how the Israelites have been progressively becoming more and more like the pagan Canaanites around them, instead of remaining a special and set apart people for God, who were dedicated, who were committed and dedicating themselves to the law and following of it. They are becoming more and more pagan in the way they behave and in their religion and how that influences who they were as a people. And we really see that a lot here with Samson. We know the antagonist in the story is the Philistines, and they have come down as oppressors upon Israel. If we go back to chapter 13, we read that this took place for 40 years. And it seems that Israel just kind of grew accustomed to having their Philistine overlords, and they weren't really going to make a big deal out of it. Yet Samson was to be that person, as was told to him, or told to his mom and dad by the angel of the Lord. He was to be the person to begin the release of the people from the oppression of the Philistines. And up to this point, I don't know if we've really seen all that much of that coming to fruition yet. So we actually see and have seen in chapter 14 that Samson seems to be kind of buddy with the Philistines. He doesn't have that much animosity against them for the most part, at least just from a pure nationalistic standpoint. The fact that they were pagans and he was a part of God's people, he's chummy with them to the extent that he gets a wife from the Philistines. And it is that relationship that we see in verse 14 that is the beginning point to where we are here in chapter 15, that all that took place with his Philistine wife, about the riddle and the changes of clothes and the killing of the Philistine men and the taking of the clothes in order to pay the debt that was owed because of them figuring out his riddle. And he kind of leaves in a huff. That seems to be what we see at the end of chapter 14. Alan is in a rage. Samson returned to his father's house. And we have to note what is said in verse 20, that his wife was given to one of the men who had accompanied him. In the eyes of the husband, or excuse me, the father of this bride, she had been abandoned and she was given to another, which is really going to cause issue once we get into chapter 15. Alan, why don't you read for us that first little bit of chapter 15 and set the scene for what we see here in this section of the Samson saga?
In verse 1, it says, "Later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat as a gift and visited his wife. 'I want to go to my wife in her room,' he said, but her father would not let him enter. 'I was sure you hated her,' her father said, 'so I gave her to one of the men who accompanied you. Isn't her younger sister more beautiful than she is? Why not take her instead?' Samson said to them, 'This time I will be blameless when I harm the Philistines.' So he went out and caught 300 foxes. He took torches, turned the foxes tail to tail, and put a torch between each pair of tails. Then he ignited the torch and released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned the piles of grain and the standing grain as well as the vineyards and olive groves. Then the Philistines asked, 'Who did this?' They were told it was Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because he took Samson's wife and gave her to his companion. So the Philistines went to her and her father and burned them to death. Then Samson told them, 'Because you did this, I swear that I won't rest until I have taken vengeance on you.' He tore them limb from limb and went down and stayed in the cave of the rock at Edom."
All right, Alan, we have a man who last we see him in chapter 14 has left in a rage and it almost seems like left the bride at the altar, and the father is saying, well, we can have this. So he gives, if we're looking at this from a comical standpoint, just gives the bride to the best man. Yet whenever Samson gets back, he finds that his wife isn't his anymore. And we could probably understand why he is upset with that. What do you see here being Samson's his mindset at this time? Remember, he left, he's now come back, and it seems like he wants to fix maybe what he left undone. And yet once he realizes that isn't an option, he's going to continue to engage in this conflict with the Philistines. Alan, what do you see here in this opening part of this chapter that progresses this theme of Samson's conflict with the Philistines?
One thing that drives the story forward, I think, is a little bit of misunderstanding in terms of if he's married or not. From what I've read with the Israelites, I mean, pretty much from the time they are even betrothed, they are considered married. They're considered wed, to the point where, like we mentioned, Mary and Joseph, the parents of Jesus, Joseph would have had to divorce Mary. I mean, actually, certificate of divorce and everything to put her away. That's what that meant. Even though, I mean, they hadn't, been together as husband and wife, and they hadn't had the ceremony yet. They were essentially by law married at that point. With the Philistines, it's a little bit different. They're probably more, I guess, more what we would think is, until it's been consummated, or until the end of the marriage week, they wouldn't necessarily consider her his wife. So that might be some of the reason why the father thought he could pass her down to the next to the best man or whoever it was. But even if not, Samson's gone, he's left. I mean, the wife needs somebody. Clearly, I don't think the Philistines have quite the same strictness about marrying and divorcing and marrying and sleeping around and stuff. So she needs a husband just to survive. He's not going to take care of her. All this is done. He doesn't want to have another big wedding and pay for all that. Mm-hmm. So this is a great opportunity to just pass her along. And it's kind of ironic. What was Samson's wife, trying to avoid in chapter 14? Well, the men had threatened to burn her alive, burn her house down. Right. Well, she did what they said, and what ends up happening before too long? Well, they still come and took torches and burned the house down. So, and really, and I guess probably as a response to Samson burning down all of their crops and their grain. And it mentioned during the wheat harvest. So all of these were right at the end. They're in the middle of harvesting things. They're olive groves and vineyards. All these were, this is their year supply of food right here, and it's getting burned up. So this is more than just I torched your car or something. This is, devastating to their economy, to their ability to survive over the course of the next year. So the reaction is understandable by the Philistines, but yeah, I think you see God's hand in all of this. He's using Samson's sense of revenge. Like he's constantly avenging himself
Right.
throughout the text. So he's mad that his wife got taken from him, so he goes and torches the Philistines' fields, and then you know, and then later on when they come and burn his wife, then verse 7, he goes and tears them limb to limb, and however many he killed during that episode, we don't know, but he's constantly avenging all these wrongs that are done to him, and God's just using them. He's using Samson to torture the Philistines, and of course, Samson. A lot of the things that Samson's doing are brought on by himself. All of his trouble.
Right, and it is important, I believe, to put all this in the context of exactly what was told to Manoah and Mrs. Manoah concerning what Samson would be, the role that he would play in Israel's history at this point. We go all the way back to chapter 13 and verse number, let's see here, verse number 4 speaks about what she must be careful to make sure takes place between her and her son, that you be careful not to drink wine or beer or to eat anything unclean, for indeed you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you must never cut his hair, because he will be a Nazarite to God from birth, and he will begin to save Israel from the power of the Philistines, that he's going to be the one that overcomes the Philistines. And then we progress in the story and we see exactly how God's going to carry this out in chapter 14. And the beginning of the chapter there, he goes down to Timnah, and he sees this woman that we're referencing right here, that he wants to have her as a wife, and his father and mother are saying that you don't need to do this. You need to find someone from among your own people. He doesn't want to hear it. He wants her for himself, and that begins one of the themes throughout the story of Samson's eyes. He's seeing what he wants to see, and he desires to have what it is that he sees and pleases him. And then we get this comment, this editorial comment in verse 4 of the author, giving us this kind of behind the scenes understanding of what's taking place, that his father and mother in Judges 14 verse 4, his father and mother did not know this was from the Lord, who wanted the Philistines to provide an opportunity for a confrontation. At that time, the Philistines were ruling Israel. And we're going to see this as we go throughout this particular chapter, Alan, the willingness of the Israelites just to take it, just to take the oppression of the Philistines. They were fine. They were comfortable, it seems, at this time being under the thumb of the Philistines. But the Lord wants to shake that up. He wants to show that this is not how things ought to be, which is why he has all of this taking place between Samson and the Philistines. I want to note a couple of things, Alan. Number one, he goes to his wife to consummate the marriage, to bring it to fruition. And it could be that as we're reading this from a literal standpoint, here he is wanting to take a harvest of his wife, and maybe to reap a harvest through the reproduction of children at this point. If that is kind of Samson's mindset, and we know how important it was to have descendants at this time, if that was Samson's mindset, then we kind of understand the way that he gets back at them. That you took away my ability to reap a harvest for my wife, so now I'm going to take away the ability for you to reap a very literal harvest from the produce of the land. But then secondly, I want to note here that we highlighted from chapter 14 that Samson really shows himself as being impulsive in many cases. He's just kind of flying by his emotions. And yet that's reversed a little bit here. He seems to be very calculated in the way he goes about getting this revenge. Again, he's seeing what's been taken from him, and he considers, okay, what would then be just in his mind for me to take from them? Well, they've taken my harvest, so I'm going to take their harvest. It also would have taken probably a little bit of time to trap 300 foxes and to go about that. So again, very calculated here, which shows that maybe sometimes whenever we paint Samson as simply being a meathead jock who just drags his knuckles on the ground and just flies by the seat of his pants and is just led along by his emotions, we see him right here being able to put together a thought process and to come together with a plan about how he's going to get his revenge. And as you mentioned, vengeance is certainly something that is constantly seen on the mind of Samson, wanting to make sure that people who have disrespected him or have wronged him, have harmed him in some way, that they are going to get what is coming to them, which you read there at the end of, or within verse 7, until I've taken my vengeance on you. He tears them limb from limb, and then he goes down and he stays at the cave at the rock of Etam. And at this point, the Philistines are saying, okay, we've got to make our move now. We need to make our move on this guy, and this is how we're going to do it. We know where he is. So the Philistines in chapter 14 verse 9, they go up and they camp in Judah, and they raided Lehi. So the men of Judah said, well, why have you attacked us? We have this. It seems there was some sort of agreement here that the Israelites would be in submission to the Philistines, and they would have peace. So the Philistines reply, we have come to tie Samson up and pay him back for what he did to us. So there's this constant back and forth of vengeance. Well, you hit me, so I'm going to hit you. Or you kick me, so I'm going to kick you. And it's back and forth thing going on. So the people of Judah, they say, okay, well, let us appease you, our Philistine overlords. Let us participate in this as well. In verse 11, that 3,000 men of Judah went to the cave at the rock of Etam, and they asked Samson, don't you realize that the Philistines rule us? What have you done to us? Don't you realize that they're the boss? That we simply want to keep things as calm and as peaceful as possible. Why would you cause us issue like this? Is the attitude of the people from Judah, and that's just showing that they're fine with it at this point. They're fine not being the leaders, even though this is a land that God had given them to rule.
Up to this point in the story, all of the conflict between Samson and the Philistines has been Samson alone. And you would think that's what makes him so different from the other judges. What do the other judges do? Gideon, Jephthah, Othniel, Deborah and Barak, they raise an army. They gather all the forces that they can. Sometimes certain tribes didn't come, but they at least got a couple tribes and they went and fought. Well, the only time you see the gathering of tribes of a force here is the 3,000 guys. And what are they doing? They're coming to get Samson. They're not,
right.
They're not coming to fight the Philistines. They're coming to, which I don't know why they needed 3,000. You think just, they know Samson's strong, but you figure like, okay, grab a dozen guys and, he's not going to hurt us or something. I don't know why that big of a number, but take those 3,000 guys and go, raid the Philistines and beat back their oppression there. They can do that, but they'd rather, like you said, they'd rather keep the status quo. They'd rather serve the Philistines. They'd rather be like them in the way of Samson does. So they're fine. They don't want to rock the boat anymore.
Yeah, and we've noted too that there this story of Samson does not fit exactly the cycle of the judges that we've seen up until this point. And what I mean by that is you have, if you can imagine, if you've been in these studies before, just for a minute, think about that cycle where it begins with faithfulness to Yahweh. Then there is unfaithfulness to Yahweh, which leads to oppression by people of the land, by pagans, which gives way then to the people crying out to God, and God raising up a deliverer, delivering the people, and then faithfulness is restored. Within this section of the story, 13 through 16, involving Samson, we don't see the people crying out to God at all. We don't see that whatsoever, which shows that they do at this point just have this defeatist type of attitude, that this is just how it's going to be, and we're just going to have to live with it and make it a normal part of our lives. Samson says no.
They don't even help him out. Like it.
Yeah.
The language in verse 14, the Judahites tie him up and then they take him back to Lehi. So when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came to meet him shouting. So it's not like the Philistines came, took Samson and took him back to Lehi. Judah brought him there.
They delivered their own brother.
Yeah. So I would assume maybe not all 3,000, but surely there's some men from Judah that were still there, and doesn't mention once that, hey, Samson's killed 1,000 men. Let's go help him out and join him. Clearly he's winning. Clearly God's on his side. Let's go help him out, join him in some way. No, they're just, best we know, they were just sitting back watching. I'm sure astonished, but never ever helped. And You mentioned, we got the idea of Sansa being a meathead. By my count, this is the second poem that he's written in the story. So he's a poet too. He's not a meathead. He's a poet. He's
Yeah,
probably a musician too. He probably maybe made a song out of this or something. So
yeah, he's definitely in the punk rock, maybe that heavy metal type of music. I don't think we'd put him in the
that's why he
smooth
gets all the
jazz
girls.
category.
Musicians always get the girls. At least that's been my experience.
That's right.
So.
Hey, that's right. You are a good musician, and I'm sure that's really what got Melanie attracted to you. Sing her a few
If you
songs. You
ask
got to
her,
wrap
it's
around your
true.
finger. Yeah, I definitely do not have that music ability, so I actually had to do a little work for my wife. But hey, that some of us
didn't have
just
to work nearly
blessed.
as hard. You play a piano song, man. That's I mean, you're 90% of the way there.
You're good to go. We look at this, and it is puzzling in a sense for Israel, for the men of Judah to behave this way towards their own brother. And yeah, I think this is also setting us up for what we're going to see post Samson, in just the evil that Israelite committed against Israelite within the last few chapters of the Judges. Here, the evil, the wrong, is they're betraying their brother into the hands of the enemy. But when we notice that Samson allows them to do it, that they're asking, well, why have you done this? He says, I've done this to them because of what they did to me. Well, we've come to give you over. And Samson says, just swear to me that you yourselves won't kill me. No, we're going to give you over to them. And he says, okay, fine. In my mind, this would be a great part of the story where it's as if they're leading him as a prisoner, but then the ropes are kind of loose, and they actually end up following Samson, fighting against the Philistines at this point. But that's not the way Samson's story works. We always see Samson working by himself. He's kind of a lone ranger in that sense, because whenever they came to Lehi, verse 14, as you mentioned, the Philistines came shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and the ropes that were on him and his wrist became like burnt flax and fell off. And he found a fresh jawbone of a donkey, reached out in his hand, took it, and killed the Philistines, killed 1,000 men with it. And then he has the poem that you mentioned, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have piled them in heaps. With the jawbone of the donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. There's the Hebrew language here. There's kind of a pun that's being used here. The word for donkey and heap are very similar. So in a sense, he's saying with a donkey, I've turned them into donkeys. I've just shown myself to be so much more powerful than they are. And if we think about, I'll just say, if you think about that in King James language, it's a lot. You get it more. You kind of get the understanding of what he's saying there. But he's shown that with the Spirit of the Lord being upon him, he turns them into nothing. With just him by himself, with a jawbone of a donkey, he's able to turn them into nothing. And at this point, he's probably feeling pretty good about himself that he's done this thing. He has defeated his enemies. When he finished this speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and he named that place Ramoth Lehi, and became very thirsty and called out to the Lord. He says, you have accomplished this great victory through your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall in the hands of the uncircumcised? So God split a hollow place in the ground at Lehi, and water came out of it. And after Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. And this is why it is called in Hakor, which is still in Lehi today. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. Alan, what do you see about here in Samson's words to God? What do you see about his mindset, his attitude, and the way he views himself in the way that God has used him?
Well, to me, the most interesting thing is just, he's done all this great. I mean, he's killed 1,000 men, and yet, I think God's giving this as a little reminder to him, like, okay, yeah, I mean, you killed 1,000 men, but don't forget, you didn't do that yourself.
That's right.
And by the way, you could die of thirst here in a minute, and if I let you, that might happen. So, yeah, he can defeat Philistines, but there's certain things even he's not strong enough to overcome.
Right.
Something like finding water and death. I mean, the Lord is you still have to call out to the Lord no matter what. I think that's kind of the fun lesson here. Even a great, I mean, probably the strongest man that ever lived, that can kill 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, he still needs the water that God provides, the living water,
Mhm.
just like, Jesus talks about in the book of John. So, um, and I think, I mean, this is good for him that he calls out to the Lord and doesn't just, complain. At least he, acknowledges God in this sense, which, we haven't really gotten much. We haven't gotten much, positive spiritual things from Samson, but I mean, there's clearly, I mean, he understands that there is a God. He believes. Does that belief turn into, great action? No, but I mean, there is some faith there. I mean, he wouldn't have made it into Hebrews 11 without it. You want more faith and more and better action from him, but um, at least he acknowledges, you have accomplished this great victory through your servant. I mean, he's not pretending like he's the source of this great power. He knows that it's from the Lord. Now, does he value it like he should? Obviously not. We'll see in the next chapter. He pretty much toys around. I mean, he's already toyed around with his Nazarite vow and his duties there, but you at least get a little positive moment here and all this negative Samson press going on.
Yeah, the what we've seen already from Samson is he's really into himself. He again sees something, he desires it, he wants to get it for himself. He's very self-centered in many regards. And even here, he though he is acknowledging God as having achieved this victory, knows it's through your servants. It's me. And now don't you think that you need to take care of me? That this great tool, this great servant of yours isn't going to die. And yet we see God's graciousness here in providing him what he does need. Even though Samson's being a hardhead here, even though he's being arrogant in many ways, he's going to show his mercy towards Samson and give him what he needs. But we have to keep that in the context of Sam's still got work to do. He is still in this process of beginning to deliver the Israelites out of the hand of the Philistines, and that story is going to continue in chapter 16 and come to a conclusion in this text as well. Alan, do you have anything else you want to share as we can wrap up this study in Judges 15 for today?
I'm noticing from what I've read, and I just noticed another one here with this statement about falling into the hands of the uncircumcised. There's a lot of parallels with Samson and the first king of Israel, Saul. We'll see that later on with, I mean, just the fact that he, basically kills himself to avoid, falling into the hands of the uncircumcised, kind of a similar ending to their stories and their deaths. And so kind of gives you that, certain men like this, think of like Judas as well, committing suicide. There's certain men throughout the Bible that have done things like this, and they're kind of similar in terms of just moral character. Maybe not as bad as Judas or Saul here, but obviously Samson's not great as well. But just some interesting, we'll see a few more, I think, in the next chapter too. So start thinking about those.
Right. We have to remember that even though from the standpoint of Judah, they were comfortable with things being as they were. God was not. He was not pleased with this arrangement. This was not the way that Israel was to live within the land. They were to be the rulers of this great land that God had given to them. And Samson, with whatever flaws he had, he was going to be the one to deliver them and bring them back to the place that they were to be in the eyes of God. That concludes our study for today here from Judges 15. Thank you for joining us, and I hope that it has been a blessing to you in coming to know the text a little better, being able to look at a text such as this and kind of see the flow of how it fits into the story of Samson. I know oftentimes the story of Samson in our minds is very cut and dry, especially when we maybe teach it to the younger kids. We teach them about Samson's strength, where it came from. We talk about Delilah and all of that, but I think there's a lot of depth to this story and a lot of things that we can learn that can help us in our own faiths and in living for the Lord today. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those in the comment box. Or if you have any ways that we can serve you here in Jackson, Tennessee, send us a message on the Pleasant Plains Church of Christ Facebook page, or you can find us at armorofgodonline.com. You can send us a message there, and we'd love to serve you in any way that we can. I hope you have a great rest of your day. May God bless you. I hope you'll join us next time as we continue our walk through history. Friday, we're going to be getting into Judges 16, the conclusion of the Samson saga. Hope you'll join us then. If you're looking for Bible study tomorrow night, we'll be meeting in person here at 384 Pleasant Plains Road at 7 o'clock as Brother Alan Brown is going to continue his study through Ecclesiastes. You can join us in person or online. We'll also have children's classes tomorrow. Again, if you have any questions, comments, shoot us a message. Let us know. Thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and God bless.